Welcome back to my channel, everybody. This is Chia-Ying, and I'm so happy that today we are here with Marc Silva and Daniel Henry from SF Hot, San Francisco Homeless Outreach Team. So I'm so glad to come across this organization a couple of weeks ago when I was invited over there to give a training, or I would say more of a discussion with their team about how they are helping folks who are unhoused to work on their hoarding issues and to help them to be housed. So I thought this is a wonderful opportunity, and this is something that people need to know more about. So that's why I'm so glad that Daniel and Marc, you guys graciously accepted my invitation to share your experiences with my audience. So would you like to share more about yourself and your organization?
Sure. My name is Marc Silva, he, him pronouns. I'm the training manager for the San Francisco Homeless Outreach Team, but I work for Haluna Health, which is a nonprofit that staffs this team. It's a city program. I've been with the team for about 2 years, and I'll also introduce Daniel.
My name is Daniel Henry. I'm the case management supervisor, one of them for the homeless outreach team, the case management side. I was hired almost 4 years ago, came up through the levels, level 1, 2, and 3, and then was offered the supervisor position, which I love. Kind of fell into my role quite easily, and love being here.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So, Marc and Daniel, I think that this is something that even in the field of people who work with or who research about hoarding, this is a field, what you guys are experiencing is a field that's kind of like unique and not a lot of attention on, right? So often we talk about hoarding, we talk about, or we just think about a house with a lot of stuff in the house. However, we kind of like sometimes forget that people who don't have a house or who don't live in a house can experience hoarding issues. And actually, it's even more likely because if we think about how trauma is related to hoarding, and so unhoused folks actually are more likely to experience hoarding issues. And so would you like to share with us some of the kind of like real world situation that you guys encounter in terms of hoarding on the street or with unhoused folks?
Yeah, I can speak to the outreach side of things. For folks who are doing outreach in the communities, homeless outreach is a very hard job as it is, made more difficult by all sorts of things like increase in homelessness without the proper support networks. And so we do see a lot of people who are living outdoors, who are collecting things, who may be hoarding things, because ultimately hoarding is related to the behavior, not the idea that it's just somebody in their house collecting a whole bunch of stuff. It also means that somebody could be hoarding in their tent, hoarding in their RV or vehicle, which is something we do see quite a bit. And a part of it is, a reaction to try to build a semblance of, an old life, maybe a life that they had when they were housed. So we've seen people kind of create whole living room setups in their tent, which is really impressive. Because we're like, how do you get all this stuff in here in the first place? It's just a small tent. But a part of it is trying to take back what has been lost.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, some of it too is collecting things that we would consider or have less value for, like empty bottles or scrap metal and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I've seen encampments where they would have a TV, a microwave, like a center table and a lounge chair. None of it plugged into anything, but people sitting around, and it's either for maybe we'll get electricity at some point, or maybe it's just like makes them feel like they are still attached to a normal life, like a regular house.
Mhm.
And I have some notes about what's interesting to me is the spectrum between trash and value. You know, it's like what they're collecting. Some people hoard because they are in a mental state or in a physical state where they cannot, you know, throw stuff away. So they'll end up collecting things that, like trash and empty food containers and things like that. Other people will collect things that are going to equal some sort of value to them that they're going to be able to trade or whatever it may be. I mean, in the eyes of somebody that has very little, treasures can be just about anything. It's really depends on the person.
Yeah.
And we find that a lot with the attachment people have to things. And then our job is to try to prepare them for actual, you know, living inside four walls and what the property will allow and uh, pest inspections, all the things that come with that expectation of housing.
Yeah. Well, I think what both of you are sharing, it's kind of like I have a question bubbling up in my mind, which I imagine some of the people who are listening to this may have. And so that question is, so how do we know it's hoarding, right? It's just obviously that this is not enough space for things, right? Could it be just that they don't have enough space, so that's why things are overflowing, or whether like basically is it a question of space or it's more of a question of actual hoarding? Yeah, how do we differentiate this?
That's a great question. And also, it's it's almost like in the eye of the beholder. It's like we really, I mean, to me, hoarding would be where any space that's available gets filled. You
Mhm.
know, my grandma used to say, any flat top is a catch-all. You know, it catches everything. And I saw that true. And apparently I have her blood inside of me, and any flat surface will be a catch-all. Uh, but hoarding definition, and maybe you could correct me, is like when you just collect things for some random attachment and value to it that you can't let go of. And it could be the spectrum of things that could be anything from an empty bottle to an actual thing that's been bought and the price tag not even taken off yet.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I think that as you're saying that, I think that we did have this discussion. Actually, some of the people who are in your team raised this question in the training that we did a couple of weeks ago, and they're saying, well, yeah, could could people, if we give people more space, would this solve their quote unquote hoarding issues? And I think, Daniel, what you're saying is that maybe not if it's really hoarding. Yeah,
Yes.
and maybe it won't solve the issue because I can also recall there are some hoarding clients that I see they are housed, and some of them are wealthy enough to have abundant amount of space, but it's never enough space for things to build up in. Yeah, and so maybe that we kind of differentiate the space versus hoarding, and that also the other end is true that when we don't have enough space, people can still experience hoarding. So space and hoarding are kind of two separate things.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say, if you took all of the things that I own in my one bedroom apartment and you couldn't fit it in a tent. And I think what we all have to kind of consider is the vast majority of people who are on the street right now in San Francisco are people who at one point, had their name on a mortgage or on a rent lease, things like that. It's not like there's a huge majority of people who are, quote unquote, not from here. It is, these are our neighbors. These are people who have grown up in these communities. And so we also have to be a little more considerate toward folks because the expectation of people who are experiencing homeless is that you're going to be able to pick up your stuff and take it wherever, and to the shelter, to housing, to somewhere else. And oftentimes there are a lot of limits to what people can bring into shelter, like most shelters in San Francisco only allow you to have 2 bags, and that's like 2 garbage bags worth of stuff. Keeping in mind that a garbage bag, has its connotation, right? That we're bringing somebody into a shelter and we're asking them to put their items in a trash bag, which is, it can be a little bit emotional for some people because it feels like they are taking what they value and putting it into this bag that kind of represents trash. And so I think just even in that perspective, we're seeing people who have a lot of trauma, deep, complex trauma, and that trying to process, the balance between, what you want and what you need and what makes you happy with, your actual goals, like housing, getting into shelter and all that. So to me, it seems like, the space issue can be neither here nor there, but when it comes to whether or not these behaviors become incongruent with somebody's goals, that's when we kind of have to figure out, like, what are we going to do here? How are we going to wade through this complication for you?
Yeah.
So a lot of conversations on the street happen about that.
Right. Would you be able to share a little bit more, either of you, would you be able to share more kind of examples about like people really having a lot of attachment to their items and how that could jeopardize their opportunities to get in the shelter?
I have a great example of that. We had a client who was living in a tent in an alleyway. She stayed out there because of the connection with another person out there for the most part. She also had a stabilization room, which she filled to the brim with actual pretty nice stuff like coat racks and little end tables and things like that. And when we went to house her, they were going to be able to bring basically no things that were made out of wood because of the bed bug situation. They were going to have an inspector on site at a certain time window so that when she came to sign her lease, she was going to be able to bring a lugs mover full of stuff, basically boxes and clothing and stuff, but that would have to be inspected by a dog for pests and things like that. And we had to have the conversation with her that a lot of what you've collected, although nice, is not going to be accepted into this apartment. They're the type of property that would like to see things ordered from Amazon or IKEA and unboxed, those kinds of things could be delivered and they would accept them. But we had to have the conversation that, and I always try to basically use my own examples. Like I collect things and sometimes, once a year I have to go through it and inventory and throw stuff out. And it's like, I try to treat them as normal as possible from the beginning and reason with them about the fact that material objects can come and go. And that most things, if you make a depletion in your life for things, it'll get filled up. So don't worry about the loss of something. That it's about the efficiency of how you're going to be able to use it in your life. And also prepping them that you're leaving this situation to go into a more stable position. And all of our stabilization phases to get them to that point where they can accept the fact that things come and go. And if you really want it, you'll be able to get it back.
Mm-hmm. And was this person able to let it go?
Yes, she fought tooth and nail, to be honest. But
Mm-hmm.
she was somebody who had fairly intense mental health issues, but also was able to wrap herself around the idea at the point of moving in that this was important for her to sustain her opportunity for housing.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah, yeah, I can only imagine how like there's like for somebody to go from having a place to live to being living on the street, that itself is a traumatic experience, right? And not even mentioning what other traumatic experiences they can encounter by living on the street. Right, and so going from a relatively stable place to a unstable place and trying to find stabilities. and in the unstable environment, which is living on the street. And I think it's quite understandable that we wanted to, sometimes we rely on not just humans to make us feel safe. We rely on, like you guys are describing, like setting up the normalcy of life, even though the microwave is not plugged in the outlet in a with electricity, but just having the look of a living room grants the people, make them feel some kind of stability. And then having to then unplug that, remove that, and putting things in the trash bag to go to somewhere else. Like, how can people trust that process, right? To know, hey, this seemingly kind of disrespectful way to do this is actually going to take you to a better place. Yeah, so that whole turmoil is just kind of, yeah, it's incredible what people have to go through on the street.
And it's really centered in rapport building between ourselves and the client.
Right.
Over a period of time, they begin to trust that what we say is true and what our decisions around things are going to be good for them. And it takes a while to build that up. You know, at first they don't trust people because they've probably been let down many times. And on that note, a lot of the possessions that they're attached to have been stolen. And so sometimes they feel like that, you know, that stabilization room is the safest place for their stuff, even
Mm.
though they're not going to be able to keep it, you know. So we helped her inventory it and take things that were actually going to be accepted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Can either of you share some examples of like how, because I imagine this example, which was fortunately a successful example, is probably not the majority of the case,
Right.
right? So there's probably plenty of situations people rather keeping their stuff than going into a shelter. Can you tell us more about how that looks like and what are the reasons or what are some of the situations like that?
Yeah. Um, you know, in the outreach world, you know, we're dealing with people exclusively outside, and you know, we're dealing with people who are highly traumatized, who have been, you know, victimized by systems of care, who've kind of experienced, you know, isms in any level, you know, racism, sexism, transphobia. You know, whether we like it or not, those still exist in the Bay Area, and they still exist in, you know, service provision, unfortunately. And you know, it can be really challenging because people, you know, we want people to go inside. We want people to have a roof over their head, because I I know that I believe that everybody deserves a roof over the head, and I think that you all do too. Um, but of course, the challenges exist around, you know, not bringing enough, not being able to bring enough of your possessions into shelter. And so people decline shelter. They don't want to go through the emotional process of departing with items. And then ultimately, it kind of creates this person who's become completely distrustful in the system, resentful toward service providers, who are a lot less likely to engage with services like ours. And so, you know, it's kind of a vicious cycle. You know, the more that we try to push and try to coerce people into um, going inside without actually having conversations about people's legitimate concerns about shelter. Um, Maybe people have legitimate concerns around privacy or health or safety, which are all very valid. And we also need to consider, you know, alternatives for folks like that. You know, non-congregate shelter sites, housing first opportunities, those types of things allow people to stabilize quickly. Um, and there's just not enough of those types of resources.
Yeah, yeah. It feels like it seems that the system is lacking a big piece, which is something more trauma informed and mental health informed. Yeah, it's kind of like it's all based on logic. Like, oh, you're not house. Let me put it in a house. But hey, but it's not that easy or not that simple. Yeah.
And
Um,
the bridge between that thing is rapport, because a lot of people in the community just want to see the person off their sidewalk, out of their neighborhood. And what we are really doing is coming down to their level, speaking to them like a human being, talking to them about their lives and what's going on, asking questions, humanizing this person, not just that that's a problem over there that needs to be dealt with. But our whole job is like really personalizing ourselves with that person so that they can see that we're talking to them, maybe like no one has for many years.
mhm.
Maybe they've been homeless for many, many years, and people have been looking down on them for all those years. Um, Homelessness is more in the public eye now. There are more compassionate people that see what they, as human beings, that, like Marc said, could have been on a lease a year ago. Who knows what happened?
Mhm.
So just the idea of making that bridge between their desire to improve themselves and also the community's agenda to clean things up and keep things kind of a normal status.
Right, right. Yeah. I was remembering that there during the training that we had a couple weeks ago, one of your colleague gave an example of a person that they were working with, and they were saying that in the shelter, you're not supposed to bring any of your blanket, right? Because they want to make sure that you have clean things, and they may give you blankets, so you're not allowed to bring your blanket. And then they were saying that this person ended up not going to the shelter because they couldn't let go of their blanket. And so from like if you were just thinking logic, you'd be thinking, hey, you have a shelter to go to. Why are you holding onto your blanket and not going to a shelter? But then when your colleague was describing what this person said, the person said, well, this blanket has been here for me for this whole time when I was on the street. And for this whole time, this blanket has been providing me comfort and protecting me, making me feel safe. I trust this blanket more than probably people or the shelter. How can I let go of the blanket? Right. And so it just feels like, yeah, that makes total sense. Makes total sense. Yeah. And so it really is a missing piece here. How do we how do we accommodate, and how do we kind of like take into consideration of people's emotional needs? Not just the practical thing, oh, hey, things have to get moving. Yeah.
It reminds me that and it underscores the need for more trauma-informed care discussions, not just at the program level and the service provision level, but also at the policy and governmental level. You know, we can tell clinicians every day, all day, you need to be trauma informed. You can tell outreach workers, case managers, you need to be trauma informed. But when the system itself is not trauma informed, and you're trying to operate in a non-trauma informed, you know, setting or approach, then you're set up to fail. We need collaboration, we need trust, we need mutuality. All of these components ensure that somebody feels safe and can trust that they're going to be taken care of. But when you have somebody who has a clear attachment to an item that means something of very significant value, and that somehow is, we think of that object being the barrier um, to them exiting their homelessness. But I think that's wrong. I think that the barrier is our inflexibility and our lack of compassion for this person. All we have to do is wash the blanket, or put it in a Ziploc bag so we can at least store it temporarily. There are other things that we can do to accommodate people, and it just takes being compassionate and being reasonable, and negotiating with people.
Yeah. Yeah, that reminded me that when I heard from your colleagues about that when they have a shelter to go to, they only have how many days to downsize to 2 trash bags. That really blows my mind away. Right.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to shelter, we have what we have when we have it. There is really no kind of getting around it. It's we get an allotment of beds. We don't actually manage any of the shelters, so we're kind of like a broker. So we go out into the community, we find people who need, that shelter the most. Typically, people who are, chronically homeless, people who've been homeless for several years or multiple times in their lifetime, and we're trying to get them into shelter. And it's primarily for people who otherwise wouldn't go and seek out these services. And so, it takes a lot of rapport building, like Daniel said. It takes time and effort to build those strong relationships in order to make progress on client goals. Yeah, so that's where my brain kind of goes to.
Hmm. Yeah. Anything you would like to add to that, Daniel?
Yeah, the just I kind of had a brain fart there, but just the idea of outreach, kind of prepping the client on day one, like, are you interested in shelter? Yes, I am, but I've got all these things. Then they can talk to them about what the parameters are, what neighborhood they'd like to be in, what the availability is for shelter. So you could work in a few days over a period of a week, of a period of a couple weeks, and finally you could notice that that person is starting to scale down because they're in pre-contemplation around this idea of going inside,
Mm-hmm.
and also I try to warm them up to the fact that rules are in life and you have to obey certain rules, and rules are set up to keep everybody safe and whatever. And there are rules that you may have to abide by as far as taking weapons in, different things like that. You're having somebody that has complete freedom to somebody who has somewhat of a restricted new lifestyle. And to do that overnight is not easy to do. Most people will I've had people get right to the threshold of the shelter and say, there's no way that guy's going to pat me down and touch me,
Mm-hmm.
wand me, or anything like that. And I've had to literally say, like, I will open up your bag. I'll open it up. I'll let them look inside. Nobody's going to touch you. And that threshold was about ready to fail on that placement. But all of a sudden, somebody on the inside came and joined with that person. Everybody had compassion around it. And that man went inside. That was a process of 2 years, me working with him. He left that location after a week. He went back for a week. He came back out to the tent. And over a period of another year, I finally housed him and finally stabilized him. He had been living in a tent for 24 years. He was a Native American guy, wanted to be out with nature and stuff. So it was a really large curve to get him in there.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a certain day where he said, Dan, you can just go and tear my tent down. I don't want to go back there. Because we kept it set up for him over all these episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally he said, you can go ahead and go tear it down. I thought that was a great success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I really appreciate the work that you guys are doing. I think that hoarding is not just like we as clinicians we're thinking, oh, hoarding is such a hard issues to work with. But hey, you guys are working with a lot of things all together. And most times hoarding is just the cherry on the top of the cake. The whole cake is other things, right? And so yeah, I just really appreciate that the resilience of your team and everybody that making sure that they support each other and support people with humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're dealing with like I said, a highly traumatized population of folks, and then in and of itself, homelessness is a trauma. And then we add on the experiences of living on the street. People are more likely to acquire a traumatic brain injury from being outside. People are more likely to develop hoarding behavior when they move into places like permanent supportive housing. And so, all of these things add up after a while. And so what we've noticed is that people, age really quickly out on the street. I remember when I first started in this kind of work, somebody told me, I don't know how true it is, but being outside ages you 7 years to 1 year being inside. And, we see that almost in real time. People who we saw, 1 month, 3 months later, they're really looking sick. And so being outside is, it can be a challenge, especially in a dense city like San Francisco.
Yeah. And do you feel like so are there things that we as a community could do, or are there ways that we could kind of even consider just within ourselves before even doing anything? Because most folks living in San Francisco or anywhere that has a population with unhoused folks, that they may think, oh yeah, that's kind of like normal, or that's kind of not pleasant, and they try to walk past that area where there are a lot of people who are on the street living in a tent. Yeah, so there's kind of like, oh, all right, that's such something I have to put up with, right? There's that mentality of that's a different world and it's the same world, but I have to put up with that. So yeah, can you say more about that? Because yeah, I think you both are the best people to educate folks who are not that familiar with this.
I could say there's three solid things that people can really help with. One is advocating for, more creative responses to people in crisis. So one of the things that I am really proud of with this team is we have a subset of outreach specialists who go out with the fire department with an EMT and a community paramedic, and they make up what we call the street crisis response team. And they're really, people who are in this to win this. They are people who are extremely compassionate, who are trained in trauma-informed care and harm reduction, who oftentimes have lived experience with homelessness or having a relationship with substances or mental health issues. And so there's a tangible way that people are really responding to this in a trauma-informed way. And so I think we are making some great progress in this way. And teams like the Street Crisis Response Team are really a great asset to the city of San Francisco. I wish that this model could be replicated everywhere, because the type of care and compassion that I've seen with my own two eyes, it aligns with what I think we all want, which is compassionate responses to people who are in a mental health crisis or a substance use crisis. Second is just patience. This work takes a long time when you're housed, and it takes just as long when you're unhoused, if not longer, or dealing with some really complex issues. And so third and final, I think, is just support for community programs like this, outreach, homeless shelters, more funds for housing subsidies, and support for migrants. All of those things need to be considered. And so I think it just takes the community to advocate for those things.
I can also add that we've started a new program where we are tracking our clients that have been housed for 30 to 90 days, kind of as an eviction defense, so that we can set them up with paying their rent, making sure that they've adjusted right to the time period, keeping an eye on any hoarding or behaviors that are threatening their lease in any way. We really do, and I really advocate for stabilization before they're housed, getting them used to going to resources, getting them a SFMTA access pass so they can come out of the tent and go to appointments and get used to this muscle memory of going to resources, where their CAP office is, where their food outlets are, all these different things that they may not have considered when they were in the tent, but now that they're inside, we've set them up to really be much more functional with that. So they have more self-sustainability. And also we can keep an eye on them for 90 days to make sure that they're not resorting back to some old behaviors.
Mhm. So I think what I'm hearing from both of you is that as neighbors who are housed, right? So what we could do is to understand what are some of the resources that may be available for our unhoused neighbors, right? And then maybe we can advocate or at least have the right mindset about we want this in the city for our unhoused neighbors. And but for example, if I live on a street where there are some unhoused folks, for example, if they are having a mental health crisis, what are some things that I could do in the moment?
Um, if you can, try to build rapport with your unhoused neighbors. You never know uh, who's living, right outside your window or door. Getting to know people is a good way for people to feel welcome in your community, but more so that it helps people feel like a human. And uh, just even giving people, a bottle of water or some food, whatever you've got on hand, I think goes a long way to
Mhm.
making sure that people feel welcome and safe. Um, giving people eye contact. I think this is something that I've seen a lot in San Francisco is people just kind of, head down
Yeah.
walking past people because they don't want to strike up a conversation,
Mm.
um, and they don't want to be asked for things. Uh,
Mhm.
So yeah, just that patience and that support for each other, I think, is something that we impart on each other, but I think we also need to impart on the people who are outside too.
Mhm.
Yeah, and on that, I mean, I try to say hello to people that are in that condition and eye contact, ask them how they're doing. You'd be surprised how many people react to that, like almost like they're, who are you talking to? Me, It's like, and I've noticed other clients that would be in the neighborhood that they're sweeping their tent area. They're trying to keep it together. And people bring them food. One guy got a mattress, it was like a $4,000 mattress. They brought him out that he
Mhm.
was laying on. I was like, wow, that's a nice mattress. I was just looking at that myself to buy. And this guy's sleeping on it. So sometimes when the neighbors personalize themselves with them, they become a part of the community and they try to take care of them. And,
Mhm.
they're always trying to talk to them on a positive note too, that this is a temporary situation. I
Mhm.
see the hot team coming out here to talk with you and everything. And they're also helping that, take their advice, work with them. They're the right people to work with to get you stabilized.
Yeah, those are great. These are great tips and great advice and examples of how as part of the community, how the housed people can be supportive of the unhoused people, and knowing that everybody has a hard time at some point in their lives.
Right.
Yeah. And lastly, so at least for people who are in San Francisco, so if they see an unhoused person in their neighborhood, and then they feel like they can probably benefit from your organization, is there a way, a telephone number for them to call and kind of like get your attention about this? And even more broadly, do you guys know any like resources, maybe offline you guys can share with me and I can put it in the description underneath the video for people who are outside of San Francisco, like if there's any organizations like you or like even like a search page to find those organizations.
Absolutely. In San Francisco, we have a really robust system, and as robust as it is, it is overtapped. So one thing that people can do, if you see somebody in a mental health crisis, call 911. that is first and foremost, we may have some reservations about doing that because of, historical past incidents, but I think, the Department of Emergency Management has done a great job of adapting the way that they're collecting information from those 911 calls to ensure that the response is appropriate for what the caller is seeing. So if you do see something, describe in clear, objective behavioral terms. I see somebody screaming. I see them throwing objects. They look unwell. They're spoiled. Whatever it may be, it could mean that we need to medically intervene. And so when you have somebody like the street crisis team show up, you've got all the perspective there. You've got, the medical perspective, the behavioral perspective, the resource perspective, and it creates this great little this team of people who can problem solve in real time with somebody, but also have the connections and resources to get somebody hospitalized if necessary, get somebody into shelter if necessary, help them navigate the systems of care, which can be oftentimes complicated, especially if you don't have a phone. And so, yeah, don't be afraid to call 911. There's some great responses that can happen from that.
Mm.
And then, of course, 311 is the non-emergency line. You're welcome to use that for things that you can't.
399.
311.
311. 311.
And then also SF-HOT has a voicemail shelter line that a client can call, 628-652-8000. And part of our team will answer those calls and log them. And then we'll make a call back to that client, and within 72 hours, dispatch an outreach team to them to offer any available shelter that we may have at that time. If they don't get a shelter, it can roll over to the next day, and we can just try to help them get placed on a day-to-day basis.
That's great. Can you repeat that number again?
Sure, it's 628-652-8000.
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you both so much for your time and your experiences and compassion. Yeah, before we close, is there any last words or last quick message?
I just would like to say I really appreciate your approach to this. It's inspired me in my own work, just about the way that we look at compassion for aspects of ourselves, and I'm able to translate that to clients.
Great. I'm so glad to hear that. Thank you. That means a lot.
Yeah, agreed. I've just been so appreciative of your expertise and partnering with you to bring your perspective into our work and ensure that our most vulnerable neighbors are taken care of and get the resources that they deserve, and with the care that is the most ideal. So really appreciate your support and collaboration on helping make that happen.
Thank you. And thank you both and your whole team for what you guys do, and all the people who in different ways helping the unhoused communities near and far. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.